Somewhere on this planet right now, a woman is giving birth with no doctor, no hospital, no epidural, nothing but the people standing around her. That sounds like a horror story to modern ears. But here's the thing. That wasn't the exception for most of human history. That was every birth, for every human who ever lived, for roughly 300,000 years. And the numbers were brutal. Historians estimate that in pre-modern societies, somewhere close to 1 in 3 women didn't survive childbirth or its immediate aftermath at some point in their lives. Not 1 in 3 births going wrong. 1 in 3 women, over a lifetime, facing a real chance this would be the thing that killed them. And yet humanity didn't just survive this. We figured out an entire body of knowledge to fight it, with 0 written language, 0 anatomy textbooks, and 0 modern medicine. This is the story of how. Let's deal with the obvious question first, because it's the one that should be bothering you. If it was this dangerous, how did our species not just die out? The short answer is teamwork, and it's more literal than you'd think. Human childbirth is uniquely difficult compared to almost every other species on Earth, and researchers actually have a name for why. It's called the obstetric dilemma. Humans evolved to walk upright, which narrowed our hip structure. At the same time, our babies evolved bigger brains, which means bigger heads. Those two evolutionary pressures collided directly at the birth canal. Chimpanzees, our closest relatives, can give birth alone in the wild and often do. Humans, by contrast, are one of the only species where birth is so mechanically difficult that assistance isn't a luxury, it's close to a requirement. Some anthropologists argue this single fact is one of the reasons humans became such intensely cooperative, social creatures in the first place. We were forced to need each other before we could even be born. So who was actually in that room? Almost never just family. Nearly every culture we have any record of had a specific role, sometimes multiple roles, dedicated entirely to birth. Older women who had survived multiple births themselves were often the ones present, because in a world with no medical training, survived experience was the only credential that mattered. And this wasn't random. Skeletal remains and burial goods found across multiple ancient sites suggest certain older women were buried with tools and status markers, consistent with what archaeologists interpret as dedicated midwife roles, some dating back over 6,000 years. This was a specialization, a job, possibly one of the oldest specialized professions in human history, older than blacksmithing, older than farming. Here's where it gets genuinely impressive, because these women weren't just present for comfort, they were running something closer to a functioning medical protocol, passed down entirely by word of mouth. Take positioning. For most of the 20th century, Western hospitals had women give birth lying flat on their backs, which it turns out is one of the worst possible positions for labor, because it works directly against gravity. Ancient midwives across completely unconnected cultures, in Africa, the Americas, and Asia, independently arrived at the opposite conclusion: squatting, kneeling, or using a supported hanging position. Archaeological evidence, including specially shaped birthing stones found at sites in Mesoamerica, suggests this wasn't guesswork. It was refined, tested knowledge, arrived at completely independently, in places with no contact with each other. Different continents, same solution. That's not a coincidence. That's just what actually works. Discovered over and over by people paying close attention. Now you might be wondering, is this actually verifiable? Or are we just assuming ancient people were clever because it sounds nice? Fair skepticism, but we're not guessing here. We have direct written testimony. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving medical documents in the world, dating to around 1550 BC in ancient Egypt, contains explicit instructions related to labor and delivery, including techniques for assisting difficult births. This is a real document, physically preserved, describing real medical procedure nearly 3,500 years ago. Ancient Egyptian medicine wasn't primitive guesswork. Some of what's described lines up remarkably closely with basic principles still used today. But knowing the right position didn't remove the single biggest killer: bleeding. Without any way to stop severe blood loss, a birth going even slightly wrong could end a life within minutes. So the midwife's real job, beyond delivering the baby, was constant observation, watching blood volume, watching breathing, watching skin color, judging in real time whether this was a birth that would resolve on its own or one that needed intervention immediately. This diagnostic skill lived entirely in memory, refined birth after birth, generation after generation, never written down for most of human history, because for most of human history, writing didn't exist yet, and sometimes intervention meant something almost unthinkable by modern standards. If a baby was positioned wrong, breech, sideways, stuck, today that's an emergency surgery, done in minutes with anesthesia and sterile tools. In the ancient world, it meant a midwife attempting to manually turn the baby from outside the body, using pressure and touch alone, guided by nothing but feel and the memory of the last time this worked. This sounds almost too dangerous to be real, except archaeologists have found skeletal evidence of ancient women who survived multiple difficult births. Direct physical proof this technique worked often enough to matter across thousands of years, with nothing but hands and inherited knowledge. There's also a medical detail that gets skipped constantly, and it involves something almost every culture on Earth converged on: the postpartum period. Modern medicine only fully recognized in recent decades how dangerous the days immediately after birth actually are. A huge share of maternal deaths in history happened not during labor, but in the hours and days that followed, mostly from bleeding or infection. Ancient cultures, completely independently of each other, developed remarkably similar postpartum rituals: extended rest periods, restricted activity, specific dietary rules, isolation from illness. Traditional Chinese medicine calls this zuo yuezi, sitting the month. Similar month-long recovery traditions appear in Latin America, in West Africa, in South Asia, again, unconnected cultures, arriving at strikingly similar answers, because they were all independently discovering the same brutal truth: surviving the birth wasn't the finish line. So here's the actual answer to how humanity survived this for 300,000 years without modern medicine. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't that ancient birth was somehow safer than we assume. It genuinely was that dangerous. It was that humans built, tested, and passed down an entire unwritten medical system, refined by direct observation across thousands of generations, independently arrived at on every populated continent on Earth. Every single person alive today exists because somewhere in their direct bloodline, without exception, every single time, someone survived one of the most dangerous events a human body can go through, armed with nothing but the accumulated, unwritten knowledge of every woman who had done this before her.